Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. It still looks like a pretty robust crowd for 4:15 on a Saturday afternoon, and I think that's a really good sign. I have no slides. I have no data. I have no findings. I have a message of vision and values and potentially a lure of money. So hopefully that will cause you not to be too cranky about my standing between you and social hour. So I'm a regent of the University of California and director of a new venture called the California Education Learning Lab. And before I launch into the latter, I really do just want to underscore how thrilled I am to be here. The fact that there is something called a UC STEM faculty learning community, which I did not know existed prior to my talking to John Matsui, who is an advisor of the Learning Lab, as is Carl Wyman. And I feel really proud, I guess, both as a Californian, as somebody who works in state policy, and also as a UC regent. And just to let you know, active learning has kind of penetrated even the circles of the Board of Regents, because when campuses come to get their capital facilities projects approved, they actually, they have to tell us what's going to be in there and what they're going to do with it and whether it has a revenue stream. They're talking about active learning spaces. And they're talking even about, this is what we want to do, and we want it to be flexible for future pedagogical innovation. So it isn't just about applying things that we know that we should really be applying at a much greater scale. It is this idea that there's going to be things that come down that we don't even know yet. So to have your facilities people talk like this and sort of sell the board on this, again, great sign. So I've already told you that I'm a regent. I also want to tell you I'm a two-time English major. I'm probably the only one in this room, perhaps, that is a humanities major. I have 2 degrees. I have a bachelor's from UC Berkeley and a master's from Georgetown. And this will maybe be important, as I go through this talk. Third, I'm a failed academic. And it's important for me to confess this to you because we talk about failure and we talk about different evaluative environments, but in some ways, sometimes I think we should rebrand failure, because failure is never really failure. Failure shows us the way on so many different paths. And John used the word pathway earlier, and I thought that was incredibly important. So my first professional goal was to be a college literature professor. And I applied to a bunch of exclusive, selective PhD programs, and I didn't get into any of them. So then I did a very strange thing. I went to work for an investment bank in San Francisco, having never taken an economics class, and I worked in IT, having never taken a computer science class either. So that lasted for about a year. You could also call that failure if you want. But then I went to Georgetown and I got a master's in English, and they have a terminal master's. And I was going to go and get my PhD from the University of Madison, Wisconsin. And I was a little bit older at that point in time, not a whole lot older than a college graduate age. But I didn't do it for a number of personal reasons. And so if you want to know what happens to failed academics down the line, they get to serve on boards, governing boards of the university. So that was a different pathway, I would say, back into higher education. So before I want to say, before I tell you about what I'm doing now, I was a journalist. I was a management consultant. And until about 6 weeks ago, I was a politics and policy professional for about 16 years for the state of California. And 4 of those years I spent deeply immersed in higher ed. And so I do have, in addition to being a regent, I do have a very sort of state-level perspective on higher ed policy, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So what is my belief system? Being a humanist, so to speak, I believe that belief systems are very important. And part of my belief system is that I really believe in people's capacity to learn, that they really can learn anything, almost anything, given the right context, the right tools, the right explanations, or the right motivations. That's my belief system. I think human beings are by nature curious. I'm a curious person, and I'm also a parent, and for many of you who are parents, you know that the smaller the human being, the more curious they are. And we, as a society, perhaps, tend to stamp or teach that curiosity out of them over time in favor of something else. And that something else is often excellent imitation, right? The more proficient you become at imitation, the more successful you really are. And so proficiency is not a bad thing. And I would say it's the necessary foundation upon which we build the new knowledge, the new discoveries, makes the new explorations. But the problem is that for so many, that proficiency is either never mastered or it's where things end. And that curiosity that really fueled us in those early years, those are things that are sort of blown out for so many people. Now, that's not true of anybody in this room. You all are academics, and you've survived all the tests and the hurdles and the trials, and so you get the distinct honor of being curious and acting on your curiosity and building on new knowledge and being the explorer, the explorers of our day. And that is, it might not be the richest job in the world, but it is one of the best jobs in the world. But the problem is we can't just let the academics and the entrepreneurs think like this. We can't just save that honor for you all and the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley or San Diego or wherever. We're entering an era where this kind of thinking really has to predominate, and it has to sort of just be a lot more prolific in our student body and where we're going in society. So what does this all have to do with Learning Lab? So I've called this presentation Learning Lab 1.0 because built in to this program is this idea that we're here to iterate, or iteration is in our DNA. And I heard a funny thing on the radio the other day, that the word iteration is just a fancy word for acknowledging future failure. That's probably true. That's a version of the word of iteration. But I kind of like that. So at its most basic, Learning Lab has about 10 different attributes. 6 of them, I would say, are more general. 4 of them are a little bit more specific. So what are these 6 general attributes? 1, it's state-funded. And this, again, will be kind of important to the identity of Learning Lab. 2, it's focused on promoting intersegmental collaboration. 3, it's designed to be a faculty grant program. 4, it's about fostering pedagogical innovation. 5, it's about improving learning outcomes. And 6, it's about closing achievement gaps, or I might say opportunity gaps. The 4 more specific parameters are, we're focusing on online and hybrid environments. We're focusing on lower division undergraduate curriculum. We want to proliferate those practices that are grounded in learning science, and we want to proliferate use of adaptive learning technologies. So for the next year, this is where the money part comes in. We will exclusively focus on giving money to STEM faculty teams at our public colleges and universities that can work together across segments to use what we know or don't know, but want to, or suspect, or want to find out about, to use those things and apply those things about human learning, and to use technology tools, especially adaptive learning tools. So can this be done? Of course. I think you've all demonstrated throughout the day that there are lots of ways to approach this problem. And we could even just spend a lot of money applying what we know, let alone discovering things that we don't know. So again, we want to say that failure is actually not a bad thing, because if it's the kind of failure that gives us different productive insight, that is going to be just as important as well, even if it's not what you set out to do. So we're interested in making awards that are in the range of $1.5 million. We'll see how things land. And I want to also tell you about why STEM is our focus, which, talking to this audience, you may think, of course, STEM. But it's, but remember, this is a state level program. So, and also, we're initially focusing on STEM, but we may expand to other disciplines in the future. So first of all, the why STEM question for this state-funded program. It's to address the opportunity gap. STEM is the right choice in terms of the kinds of jobs we think are going to exist and be high-paying. They're the jobs that are going to support the kind of world we live in, and it's where you've all demonstrated where we see a lot of pronounced achievement gaps in underrepresented students. So we know that even students who have succeeded in STEM in the K-12 environment come to higher ed, and sometimes they don't succeed and they lose interest. So focusing on the STEM area is about addressing the opportunity gap. Second, it's about encouraging humanists to be involved in STEM. And that means relating to people. It means teaching people whose native language may not be math, may not be science. We have to find a way for them to relate to STEM learning. Because in the future, it's not going to be just, are you a STEM person, are you a non-STEM person? There's going to be much more, I think, integration of thinking. And so we want to have people who are, so to speak, bilingual in STEM and non-STEM fields, because we think that that's going to be important to how we solve problems in the future. So I want to digress and just tell you a story, a brief story, and I'll tell you why I've brought it up at the end of the story. And it's going to be a familiar story. So in my current role, I've been talking to different STEM faculty about what are the problems in STEM education, where do we want to be, and what do we want to remedy. And I get these answers that I think you all know, how unwelcoming STEM really is, how it's about weeding people out of courses. And if we teach it in a different way, it's just not as rigorous as, and I'll say we, but not me, but as when you all went through and got your degrees. And I kept thinking, gosh, there's something about this message that's like tickling a part of my brain. And my mind wandered to Dorothy Gale. Does anybody know who Dorothy Gale is? Nobody knows? Yes, Dorothy Gale is Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Very good, sir. So The Wizard of Oz has a lot of meaning for a lot of different things, a lot of different people. But let's turn the story into a STEM story, just very briefly. So here we have a young woman. She's from rural America. She's lost her parents. She's been displaced by a natural disaster. Could be a lot of people at this point. She's got multiple risk factors, as we might say. But she lands in college, right? And she has this desire. Let's say her desire is to be a mathematician. But she needs help in achieving her desire. Now there's an advisor who tells her, you have to go see Professor Wizard. He will help you become a mathematician. And on her way to see Professor Wizard, she meets up with three friends, and they all have their own deficits. One's not that smart, one doesn't have a lot of passion, and one has no courage. So Dorothy and her friends go see or try to go see Professor Wizard, and Professor Wizard's TA says, he's really too busy. Go away. So, but she persists because she really wants to be a mathematician. And so she sees Professor Wizard, who basically gives her an impossible task. Now, in the real story, you know who that is, or you know what that is. It's go get the broomstick. You know, in math terms, I don't know what this is, if it's like memorizing pi to 10,000 digits or whatever. It's just this clearly impossible task. And so most people would go away at this point, right? Like, I didn't really want to be a mathematician. I'm going to pick something easier. And some people would have gone away well before that, right? But her desire is so strong, she can't just give it up. So she does go onward, and by the miraculous turn of events, she succeeds. And her friends, who through their journey have acquired some smarts, some courage, some passion, they go back to see Professor Wizard. And they are told to still go away. But because she has her friends with her, and because she has this inner drive, she succeeds in getting Professor Wizard to help her. And all's well that ends well in this story. Now, why am I even bringing this story up? So is this a good model for STEM? Is this a good model for any discipline? Now, there's a lot of people who might say, yes, you know, Dorothy had to prove herself worthy. And in so doing, she developed inner strength. She had productive struggle. And these things benefited her in the end. And certainly, I've gone through my share of productive struggle, and I've benefited from it. But, and I want to say, I recently talked to the MESA director at San Diego City College. And they have actually some great resources on their website. If you want to just Google San Diego City College and MESA. There's one, and a lot of it's practical, kind of how to study and how to break things down. And it does address things like help-seeking behavior, which a lot of underrepresented students are known not to engage in. But one thing that's on their website is something called like the secret to success. And it's an African village story where the lesson is, in order to succeed, you have to want something as much as you want to breathe. So in the case of Dorothy, being the mathematician, it really was about going home, right? And you could see how, boy, she's going to be persistent in this. This is something she really wants. It was equivalent to wanting to breathe. But for so many people, picking your major, graduating, whatever, it's not quite the same thing as wanting to breathe. But so why do I think this philosophy of discouragement or weeding people out, winnowing the field as it is not wise for the state, and it's not wise for public university systems? Can anyone sort of take a guess at why I think it's not good for the state to have this as a policy? Anyone? You can't possibly be shy. Yes, that is one very sort of obvious answer. Anyone else?
You're eliminating ideas from people with a lot of different perspectives.
Yes, sir. Yes, all of the above. Consider this, is as a state, we've invested 13 years in a student's education. 13 years. You know, we're funding the K-12 school system. So we don't gain anything by students' failure. We don't gain anything by their lack of success. And the state's incentives are not always aligned with your institutional incentives or your department's incentives. I recently heard from one campus, who shall remain nameless, that they were failing students in the lower division classes of a certain major because they couldn't meet the demand in upper division. It was kind of shocking to me, actually. And it made complete sense from their kind of institutional level, but as somebody who is about state policy and state budgets, I was a little dismayed. And maybe you are too. I hope you are dismayed in that particular instance. But so let me come back to, again, why is a state, why this program is state funded. We care. We care and we want to be more investment minded at this point about not just how students learn, but even on the faculty level, what we're learning about learning. So that's important to us. Intersegmental. People get excited when I tell them there's a faculty grant program, and when I tell them it has to be intersegmental, meaning you have to work with one of the other two higher ed segments, they look a little deflated. Like, really? And it's for different reasons from the different segments about why they think that's hard. But why did we make this intersegmental? And I'll tell you, initially, it was all three segments have to be in a project together. And one faculty member that I talked to earlier said, you might just want to make it two. That might be, yes.
Sorry, can you clarify what you mean by segments?
Okay, that's another state policy view. We talk about the three public higher education segments: University of California, Cal State, and community colleges. And we talk about the privates as a fourth segment, so to speak, but when we're talking about public higher ed, we're talking about those three segments. So why did we make it intersegmental? There are actually a lot of reasons, but here's the one that I will tell you for the purposes of this talk, is we want people to approach the learner as a learner. Meaning, we all think about the differences because we're differently selective institutions or segments, that the UC student needs something different than the CSU student needs something different than the community college student. That might be true, and it might be true for supportive services, although you could see how there's a lot of commonality between students who attend all three, who are at all three segments. But we want people who are bringing proposals to really approach just a learner as a learner. And how far back do you have to go? I don't know. But to have that, like, what can work for a learner that has all these different levels of preparation. And I learned the other day that preparation is kind of a heated word in certain circles. I don't know if you've heard this, but I was talking to a community college faculty member, and yeah, preparation is a sensitive word in those circles. Faculty. Why are we focusing on faculty? Because we do put money in all kinds of student success efforts. We want to harness the power of faculty and the inquisitiveness and the research, all of that. So that's why we're focusing on faculty. In terms of pedagogical innovation, I don't know whether you would believe this, but I recently heard one administrator talk about students these days being hardwired differently. I don't know if you believe that, even just based on the technology. One could sort of wonder whether that was true, but if you actually think about the field of epigenetics, you might think, well, of course that's true. This sort of feedback loop between the environment and gene expression, or the environment and how people learn. So pedagogical innovation is something that we want to promote. Improving learning outcomes. We're going to have to think more deeply about what we want to improve, how we measure it. And we may want to start measuring different things and seeing how those things can be defined as success. Then the last thing about closing achievement gaps, we want to make sure that students have opportunities that are directed by their passions or something else, but not by deficits. So some of the other things are self-explanatory: why online and hybrid environments. This is the future. This is the future of education. Some would say online has the worst outcomes, but then you could just flip it and say that's where the most ground needs to be gained. Lower division undergraduate curriculum. It was a way for us to touch all three segments of higher education. And then the learning science, probably self-explanatory. The adaptive learning technologies piece, or just technology in general, it's really about thinking about technology in the way that we would think about it in other arenas, meaning how does technology free up and change the kind of labor people can engage in? And that is faculty labor, that's TA labor. It's how do you supplement, amplify, and scale faculty impact? And we think technology has a or should have a pretty big role in that. So we're in the process of developing our first RFP, and I'm not going to talk about that too much in case some of you want to apply, which I hope is the case. I have really an amazing group of faculty who are serving as advisors, and as I mentioned, John Matsui and Carl Wyman are 2 of 5 right now. So if we're successful in this phase, I think what will happen is we're going to build on so much of the work that you've talked about today. And if we're successful, we'll be creating, enhancing, making more robust the faculty learning communities that exist. And then if we're really successful, we'll catalyze more innovation, and we'll have a different approach to solving problems, including how we learn and acquire learning. So thank you very much. Well, as we're developing the RFP, I think that's something that we're going to talk about. And we've talked about maybe splitting, like having a mix of things that are focused on research, things that are focused on implementation and scale. So that's yet to be determined. I'm sorry, can you speak a little bit louder? Yes, when we put the call out for proposals, the minimum requirement is that faculty from 2 out of the 3 segments must be involved. Who else you bring in is up to you. And it will be part of your budget and your plan, but you can involve the private sector, you can involve startups. There's not a limitation to that.